Your host for today's show is B. Alan Bourgeois.
Hi, and welcome to the Texas Authors TV podcast. Today we have with us or I should say, Dr. Charles William Dailey. He has three degrees, a lot of it in philosophy and understanding of human nature and stuff. But I'm going to let him explain that a little bit better than I can. Welcome, Charles. I'm glad you are here.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me.
Pleasure. So you have three degrees. Let's get started with that because what got you wanting to learn about philosophy and becoming a PhD holder, a doctorate? Tell me how that all started.
Okay. Well, I'm from Texas. I grew up in Winnie, Texas, which is in southeast Texas, east of Houston. And I went to Lamar University and studied history. I started off in physics, actually, but I became more interested in the ideas in physics than the mathematics. And I started studying history and took a minor in philosophy and a minor in French, both. Uh, and so I've always been interested in various cultures, especially the ancient and medieval worlds. And I emphasize that more in my history degree at Lamar. After that, I went to the University of Houston, the main branch, and I studied philosophy and took a MA in philosophy and did my master's thesis on the philosophy of art and specifically on Martin Heidegger's Origin of the Work of Art, which is a famous essay that he wrote, the German philosopher from the early part of the 20th century. After that, I had a few different jobs. I didn't go straight into my doctorate at that point. I worked at a writing center. I helped raise cattle and rice crops, actually. Both sides of my family have been farmers and ranchers for a few generations. And I framed artworks for a while, about a year. And then I went back and pursued my PhD in philosophy at the University of North Texas. But the department is a department of philosophy and religion. And I focused more on, I would say, Eastern, South Asian, and East Asian philosophies and religions than Western philosophy at that point. When I took my MA at the University of Houston, I focused exclusively on Western philosophy, European and American philosophy. But at UNT, I focused more on Eastern, and especially South Asian, Hinduism, Buddhism, etc.
I'm, I'm going to stop you there because I'm curious. You said you studied Western philosophy in Houston, and then you
Yes.
went to Eastern philosophy in North Texas. Why the difference? Why the change? And why not just continue with Western?
I think I really had more of an interest in Eastern philosophy as a child and a young man than I did Western philosophy, but I didn't really understand how to pursue that when I was in high school. I didn't really think about it that much. I didn't think about college really until the year before I graduated. I wasn't one of these students who was preparing for college from a freshman or younger. I mean, I had good grades and everything. I just didn't really think about that. And I would just have sort of philosophical ideas and write them down in journals and stuff. And I got into the master's degree at University of Houston, not really knowing what specializations were open at that point. But when I was a kid, I loved movies like Star Wars and Excalibur, which is about King Arthur, and all these strange sort of fantastical stories. And a lot of these stories, there are sages or wise people, and often those individuals follow the model of Eastern thinkers or Eastern philosophers than they do the model of Western philosophers, unless you go way back to the Greeks, maybe. But I think that just sort of the whole philosophy being equivalent to lifestyle and not just something you do as a job appealed to me more. And so at a certain point, after I got through my master's, I think, and reading some of the Western philosophers who'd gotten into that, like Heidegger and Schopenhauer, Germans, that kind of gave me an avenue back into something that I had already loved and appreciated from a young age. Other things that I watched when I was a kid was like that series Kung Fu with David Carradine, and just the idea that even in the fighting of the East as opposed to the West in most cases, there's sort of this philosophical or religious element that appealed to me from a very young age. I don't remember how long ago when it started exactly.
So this then I'm assuming led you into your writing career. But what else? I mean, if you're doing a PhD, so you've got to write a pretty major book basically
Mhm.
about that anyways. But was there anything else that was pushing you to be a creative writer or a philosophical writer other than the school aspect?
Other than the school aspect, I guess just my love of art and culture, and like I said, I guess certain archetypes of wisdom, like the sages from different cultures around the world, whether it be Asia or ancient Greek or South American shamans or Aboriginal shamans in Australia. Just I've had sort of this interest in wise people from different cultures since I was a child. And my mother and I used to watch a lot of movies about Africa and Indian stuff when I was a kid and growing up. She always liked that stuff. I think that had a big impact on me also. The reason I was interested in that, and just the beauty of all of that, you know.
Now, coming from a background of being in Texas and the aspect of your lives, because you said both sides of your family were ranchers and farmers and stuff of that nature.
Yeah.
That is generally speaking, and I'm trying not to pigeonhole you too much there, but generally speaking, that is more of a Christian foundation. Most families are based in that. So for you to go into an Eastern philosophy aspect, how did that play out for you in your life? I mean, was there challenges there? Did you find it real easy to accept that because you grew up watching that stuff?
I did. It really wasn't an issue at all, and none of the members of my family had a problem with it. I mean, they each have their beliefs. My mother's always been Catholic, but none of them had a problem. I didn't convert to any Eastern religions. I would say I would call myself sort of C.S. Lewis's mere Christian, as in mere Christianity. You know, I don't attend any particular church. Every once in a while, I will. Really, for other people, out of respect for them, not for myself. Um, but no, I mean, I like thinking about the ideas. I'm more of a philosopher than a religious practitioner. It's just that I think there's a lot of wisdom in the religions of the world, including Christianity, you know. And so there was none of that sort of overbearing quality in my experiences as a child.
Okay. Well, I completely agree with what you're saying and the basis of everything. So before we run out of time in this segment, let's immediately jump into your latest book, The
Okay.
Climb to Philosophical. It's essays on philosophy and its enemies, which is interesting that you have that as enemies aspect. So,
Mhm.
in a nutshell, let's do it quickly because we're running out of time. Tell us briefly what it's about.
Well, briefly, it consists of 4 long essays. And these are essays that I wrote over a few years, and I had no intention of collecting them into one work. But over time, I started thinking about things that they had in common. I didn't write them to go together, but I noticed that there were things that they had in common. Um, the 4 essays are entitled Science and Tradition. Um, and then there's one that's called The Meaning of Novelty and Its Possibility in a Platonic Universe. One is called Human Nature and Human Being in the Thought of Zhengzi, who was an ancient Chinese philosopher. And the fourth is entitled Gandhi, as in Mohandas Gandhi, Gandhi on the freedom of Indian civilization and the slavery of the West, of Western civilization. And so just briefly, you may give a little summary of each one, or?
No, we'll come back
Okay.
after our break, and I'll let you definitely do that because there's a lot to unpack there.
Okay.
But let's take a break, let our sponsors do their thing, and we'll be right back.
Introducing the Texas Authors Magazine. Discover our author spotlights, writing strategies, market insights, and news from our vibrant Texas literary scene. Starting with our July 2025 issue, as you see here, our exclusive Author Spotlight series brings Texas voices front and center. Grow your reach, connect with peers, and celebrate Texas storytelling. Get your free copy or join today at texasauthorsmuseum.com.
Howdy, and welcome back to the Texas Authors TV podcast. We have with us Charles William Dailey, Dr. Dailey, actually. He has a PhD in philosophy, and his latest book is The Climb in Philosophical, the To Climb is Philosophical. Let's make sure we get that right. And it's essays on philosophy and its enemies. He was telling us basically it's broken down into 4 sections. So this is a perfect spot for you, Dr. Dailey, to go through and give a brief, and I do mean brief, outline of each of the 4 and how they interrelated, because you said you didn't initially intend for them to relate, but yet they do. So go for it.
Right. Okay, well, the first essay is entitled Science and Tradition. And in that essay, I discuss 3 different ideas of science, what science is. The first idea is probably the most familiar to people, what they think of as science, and that is based in the Enlightenment tradition of science, where you have this method of trying to learn about nature, you observe, you formulate hypotheses, you test them, and then you eliminate the ones that don't survive the test. And it's an honest pursuit. But I also talk about 2 other kinds of science, or things that are called science. And the most dangerous and nefarious is a form of scientism that has become more prevalent, I think, in the modern world in the last 50 years or so. And that is giving things the veneer of science that one wants the public to believe or to be persuaded of. And so there's a lot of talk. We've seen it in a few different instances, which I don't go into the particulars of calling things science in order to sort of shame people or castigate them if they don't accept it as science. Whereas, of course, the scientific method is based upon always questioning, always putting things to the test, not just assuming that something is correct because experts, so-called experts, say it does, say that it's true. And of course, experts often disagree in true scientific discourse. You have diametrically opposed positions on any given topic. But again, in this sort of scientific approach to science, often it's presented as just one of these approaches is correct and the others are insane or lacking information, etc. And then the third form of science is traditional science. And traditional science is methods for expanding consciousness or awareness that go back to ancient times. So one example of that is the different yogas in Hinduism, bhakti yoga, jnana yoga, karma yoga, forms of meditation that increase awareness or consciousness and then allow one to see arguably permanent features of the universe or permanent features of existence. And this is not based upon the testing method that you see in Enlightenment science, the first science I mentioned, but rather upon developing yourself and your discipline and your approach to life in such a way that you become sort of a more transparent window to allow these things to come into you. So your lifestyle itself allows you to receive information that you otherwise would not receive. It's not just about working hard or learning the right things. It's about being a different person. So I discuss these 3 forms of science in that essay, critiquing and pointing out the traits of each that I think are positive. And I refer to famous philosophers and their opinions like Nietzsche, C.S. Peirce, the pragmatist, the American pragmatist, Descartes, and others. The second essay in order in the book is the one entitled Human Nature and Human Being in the Thought of Junzi, and that's spelled Xunzi, the ancient Chinese philosopher. And what I talk about in that essay is how there is a difference between human nature and human being in Junzi's philosophy. Most people think that human nature is sort of well, at least a lot of people think human nature is deterministic of how humans are. You're born a human being, versus being born a dog or a cow or an insect or something like that. But Junzi talks about how just because we're born with a certain structure, this doesn't actually actualize our humanity. So he talks about how one, through discipline, through learning, through ritual, he talks about ritual a lot, one sort of cultivates one's potential into being an actual human being, and that a lot of people stay as human nature. He talks, for example, about different types of kings in ancient China. And some kings become human beings, some stay with just their human nature. And human nature is bad in his book. Human being, or awareness, is, or activity. He often calls it conscious activity, is good. So he associates goodness in human being with sort of cultivating one's awareness, being more aware and being more conscious about one's decisions, and badness with being less aware or more animalistic or more instinctive, essentially. And the third essay is Gandhi on the freedom of Indian civilization and the slavery of the West. And Gandhi argues very directly and repeatedly in many of his works that he thinks Western civilization is a slave state. That's what he calls it. And that it's instituting a dark age, or a black age, as he puts it. Whereas Indian civilization, traditional Indian civilization, going back thousands of years, focuses on cultivating the spiritual side of human nature, of human beings. Of course, human nature doesn't mean exactly the same thing for Gandhi as it does for Junzi. But he talks about how, especially modern Western civilization, takes advantage of human drives and desires and sort of channels them into certain paths so that humans can be manipulated, taken advantage of. Like you see in marketing, advertising. I mean, everybody sees that, how people are taken advantage of in those areas. The whole civilization, all of Western civilization is geared in that direction. He criticizes the overemphasis on technology and on mechanization. He studied law in England, and he saw, I guess, sort of the mid-range mechanization process at that time in the early 20th century. And he keeps comparing that to the superior, what he thinks is an objectively superior Indian civilization, which is about cultivating a spiritual, moral being. And all humans have this inside of them, but it's sort of like Junzi in a way. It's not developed in everyone. And then the fourth essay is entitled "The Meaning of the Meaning of Novelty and Its Possibility in a Platonic Universe." And in that essay, I criticize a book by a cosmologist named Lee Smolin. He wrote a book about 25 years ago called "The Life of the Cosmos." And in "The Life of the Cosmos," he talks about Darwinian evolution as applied to the development of the entire universe, not just life on Earth or life anywhere, but to interstellar bodies or stellar bodies, stars, planets, everything else in the universe. He talks about applying Darwin's theory of evolution by natural selection to the universe itself. But in the process of doing so, throughout the book, if you read it carefully, he disparages Western metaphysics. He talks about Plato and the rationalists like Descartes, Spinoza, and Leibniz. And he constantly disparages metaphysics, thinks it's antiquated, and that science has shown that it's antiquated. And he's sort of implicitly putting in their place his theory of cosmic evolution, as I call it. And so part of that essay, a large part of that essay, is my defending traditional metaphysics against this attempt to sort of supplant it indirectly with these nuances and these indirect criticisms and I don't know, suggestions that it's not capable of really identifying what is real or understanding what is real. And so novelty, specifically, the idea of novelty, he says, is impossible in a Platonic universe, meaning that in the way that Plato described the universe, you can't have novelty because you have these things called forms, which are eternal ideas, not just ideas in a human's head, but eternal ideas that exist whether humans exist or not. And everything in the physical world is a reflection of a form. And if that's the case, Smolin argues, then you can't have anything new because the forms are eternal. They've already always existed. So how can you have anything new? But he doesn't exactly understand how all of the specifics of the world add something different as a reflection of the forms. And I go into that. That's a bit complicated. I can't really explain all of that in a few minutes. And that's the longest essay of the book also. So that's a summary.
And you've used up the entire 10 minutes of this segment explaining all of that. And I still have a couple questions for you afterwards. But we do need to take a break. Let our sponsors do their thing. We'll be right back.
Who will win the 2026 Best of Texas Books Awards? Texas Authors Museum 15th Annual Book Contest, now open. Celebrating books published between December 15, 2024 and December 1st, 2025, in every genre. Submit your cover and PDF via email to texasauthors@outlook.com. We will invoice you for the $50 entry fee. Learn more at texasauthors.museum.com.
Welcome to the heart of Texas storytelling, where history, culture, and creativity come alive. Welcome to the Texas Authors Museum and Institute of History. At Taimé, we don't just celebrate books, we celebrate the people behind them. From the timeless classics to today's fresh new voices, we honor the authors who shape our great state's identity. Join us at the Lone Star Festival, where readers and writers come together. Trust in Read Safe Ratings, your guide to family-friendly reads, and discover new literary treasures through Texas Authors Press, our publishing arm championing local talent. Our mission? To preserve Texas literary history and inspire the next generation of storytellers. Our goal? To build a lasting legacy where every author is valued and every story is heard. Be part of the journey. Be part of the future. Texas Authors, Museum and Institute of History, where every story matters.
America has 250 years of stories, but the next chapter, that's yours to write.
Introducing Voices of America. Your voice, your story. What does America mean to you?
Submit your story. Shape the next 250 years. Enter now at AmericanShortStories.org.
Howdy, and welcome back to the last segment of the Texas Authors Podcast. We are talking with Dr. Charles William Dailey. He has been talking about his book that came out last year, To Climb is Philosophical. He unpacked a lot of information in that. So I have a quick question for you, Doc. Real simply, knowing that you've written it and everything about it, what is the one thing you hope people walk away after reading the book that they have a better understanding or a better knowledge of?
Just that philosophy is not equivalent to a lot of the sciences, and specifically social sciences, that have developed in the last couple of hundred years. The philosophy is a much older venture, and it speaks more to what human nature is than all of these other sciences that have developed since then.
Okay. So before we run out of time, I definitely want to touch base on the fact that you have another book. It's called The Serpent Symbol in Tradition. So real briefly, lay out what that book is about.
Well, The Serpent Symbol in Tradition is based upon my doctoral dissertation of the same title. And in The Serpent Symbol in Tradition, I propose a explanation for a great deal of ancient and indigenous serpent and dragon symbolism from around the world. So in various civilizations and in various cultures, ancient Egyptian, ancient Greek, ancient Indian, contemporary shamans in South America, Mayan in Central America, and Australian and others. And I argue that the serpent symbol, what I call the simple serpent symbol, symbolizes a state of consciousness that individuals and certain groups were aware of in ancient times and in some contemporary indigenous societies. And it's an awareness of how nature, what we call nature, is chaotic in comparison to a higher state of consciousness, a metaphysical realm. And you see this in various religious texts, you see this in myths, you see it in a great deal of art, and architecture and sculpture. And in that book, I have chapters on Mayan arts and religion. I have chapters on Chinese art and religion, on Norse mythology, on Greek mythology, and various other subjects. There are 16 chapters in the book, and then there's the introduction and the conclusion as well.
We're running out of time, so I have kind of ask a couple quick questions. First off, are you writing anything else?
I am. I've just finished a manuscript for a book that I'm trying to find a publisher for, and I'm also working on another book beyond that. But the one that I just finished has to do with a place, a natural feature called Uluru in Australia, or Ayers Rock. The English name is Ayers Rock. The indigenous name is Uluru, Uluru. It's a pretty famous rock feature out in the middle of the desert, Australia. And it's about differences of opinion as to what Uluru is and what it means and who should have rights over it and who should decide how it should be interacted with. And also how philosophy figures into that and how being an explorer figures into those rules that people try to impose on it.
All right. We are running out of time, so I apologize for kind of rushing you here. You have a website that people can come and discover different articles you've written and things of that nature, correct?
I don't have a personal website, but arctos.com has published several of my essays. So most of my essays are on there. You can, and then Amazon.com carries both of my books, and there are various other sellers. Books A Million carries my first book, The Serpent, Symbol, and Tradition.
Okay. So on Arctos, ARKTOS.com, they can research your name, Charles William Dailey, and find your information. Is that correct?
Yes, if you just go on the opening page, it says who we are up on the top right, and you click on that, and it's in alphabetical order under Charles William Dailey.
Do you ever get out to festivals, book festivals, or anything of that nature to talk to people?
I haven't, but I'd like to. I'm very interested in doing that. Yeah.
Okay. And finally, one last question. Even though your books are very specific to what you studied and your background is, do you have any words of encouragement for somebody who wants to do a writing of some sort?
I would say go with what you love. Keep believing in whatever it is that you love, and work as hard as you can. But if you get stressed out over it, take a break also. But just keep remembering what it is that really motivates you and going back to it. Just briefly put, that's what I would say.
All right. I apologize. I do have one last question. I'm going to throw you for a loop here. You've written a lot of philosophical books that are related to the educational aspect. In other words, you studied, you learned, you investigated and stuff. Out of all of that, do you ever plan on writing a fictional story using what you've learned?
I have thought about it many times, but I haven't started on that. In fact, going back to what got me into writing in the first place, I was a big fan of The Lord of the Rings and other famous fantasy novels now by Terry Brooks, The Sword of Shannara, and The Chronicles of Narnia, and all that when I was a kid. And originally, I thought I might be a fantasy writer, but I never really got back to that. But maybe I will in the future.
All right. Well, I thank you very much, Dr. Dailey, for being with us. Unfortunately, we have really run out of time, but we wish you the best of luck. And I know everybody can definitely check out Arcos and follow up and see what you're doing, the articles you're putting out, and of course, your newest book once you find a publisher and stuff. Thank you again for your time, and we wish you the best of luck.
Thank you. Thank you for everything.
Welcome to the Texas Authors TV show, produced by Beyond Bourgeois for the Texas Authors Museum and Institute of History, copyright 2025. If you would like to be a sponsor of our show, please reach out to us via email at texasauthors@outlook.com. If you would like to be an author on our show, please email us at texasauthors@outlook.com for more information. Music is Frolic of Words. It was created for Texas Authors Institute by Happy Follows.